So the next session we continue to have free paper presentation. Then the session will be chaired by Dr. Ayanand. Dr. Ayanand, PSG Hospital in Coimbatore. Welcome to the dais, sir. Then now the session will be over to the chairperson.
Yeah, good morning. Dr. Rakesh, are you ready?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so you have about 7 minutes and then you can quickly go through your presentation. Carry on.
Okay. So good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Rakesh, Assistant Professor in Vaidehi Institute of Medical Sciences and Research Center in Bangalore. The topic for my presentation is perceived stress, anxiety, and depression in hospitalized COVID-19 patients. When we look at the COVID-19, it has led to a devastating social and economic disruption in people's lives. The second wave of COVID-19 infection has contributed to a greater number of people getting hospitalized for treatment. The infection and the subsequent hospitalization, it leads to a lot of stress, which ultimately can lead to anxiety and depression. And it has also been seen that almost everyone experiences stress in a varying degree of severity. When we look at the review of literature, studies done in China, by Dai et al., they found that the prevalence of depressive symptoms, anxiety and depressive symptoms were 18.6% and 13.4% respectively. And Zandifar et al. In Iran, he found out that most of the patients admitted with COVID-19 had high levels of perceived stress. And Parker et al. Also found that 36% of the subjects had elevated anxiety symptoms and 29% had elevated depression symptoms. Kong et al. In a study done in Wuhan, China, they found that 34.72% and 28.4% of the patients had anxiety and depression. Similarly, in a study done in Ethiopia by Derese et al., it was seen that depression was seen in 36.5% and anxiety was seen in 21.2%. And factors such as age, income, duration of COVID-19 symptoms, social support had a statistically significant association with depression and anxiety. In a study done in Egypt by Mohammed et al., they found that 32.6% and 39.1% had depression and anxiety, and lower levels of education, family history of psychiatric illness were the risk factors for this problems. And the need for study, most of the studies that have concentrated on stress, anxiety and depression in general population in the COVID pandemic period, and the literature on hospitalized COVID-19 patients in an Indian context is not that much. And early diagnosis and psychological interventions in these patients will greatly benefit the patients admitted. The objectives of the study, it was to assess the levels of anxiety, depression in hospitalized COVID-19 patients, to assess the severity of perceived stress among the hospitalized COVID-19 patients, and to study the association between anxiety, depression with socio-demographic and clinical variables, and to study the correlation of perceived stress with anxiety and depression. Regarding the methodology, the study was done in Vaidehi Institute of Medical Sciences and Research Center, and confirmed cases of COVID-19 admitted in the ward setting were selected. It was a cross-sectional study and the sample size was 128. The inclusion criteria were confirmed mild and moderate cases of COVID-19 infection with or without oxygen admitted in the ward setting and the age greater than 18 years. The exclusion criteria was presence of mental retardation, dementia or delirium, and patients admitted in the ICU setting, that is the severe cases. And patients diagnosed with depression or anxiety in the last 6 months and currently on active treatment with medications were excluded. Following demographic characteristics, that is age, gender, marital status, religion, domicile, family type, occupation, and socioeconomic status were collected, and clinical variables like past history of psychiatric illness, family history of psychiatric illness, history of medical comorbidities, severity of COVID-19 infection, family members with current COVID-19 infection, social support and duration of hospitalizations were collected. Perceived stress, anxiety and depression was screened using rating scales, and IBM SPSS version 22 was used for statistical analysis. P-value of less than 0.05 was considered statistically significant. The instruments that were used were hospital anxiety and depression scale. So it is used for screening depression and anxiety, which includes 14 questions, 7 questions for anxiety and 7 questions for the depression part. The items are rated on a 4-point severity scale, that is from 0 to 3, and the scores for anxiety and depressions range from 0 to 21. And scores of 1 to 7 were considered normal, whereas 8 to 10 is considered as borderline, and more than 11 is considered abnormal, and these denoted considerable symptoms of anxiety or depression. And regarding the perceived stress scale, it has been widely used and psychometrically validated as a reliable measure of psychological stress estimated over the previous 4 weeks. It comprises of 10 items measured on a 5-point Likert scale, that is never, almost never, sometimes, fairly often, and very often. And these individual scores can range from 0 to 40, with higher scores indicating higher perceived stress. And also 0 to 13 would be considered low stress, 14 to 26 would be considered moderate stress, and 27 to 40 would be considered high perceived stress. Looking at the results, the mean age of the study population was 46 years, and majority of the population belonged to the age group of 35 to 49 and 50 to 64 years. And majority of the population were male, and around 85% of the study participants were married and had a minimum, and majority had education above secondary education. And majority belonged to a Hindu religion, belonged to a nuclear family, and were from the urban areas, and belonged to majority of the population belonged to middle and upper socioeconomic status. When we look at the HADS anxiety scores, around 33.7% belong to the abnormal category, and 17.9 belong to the borderline abnormal, and normal around 48.4%. And when we look at the HADS depression scores, 66% of the population belong to normal, and 22 belong to the borderline abnormal category, and 12% belong to the abnormal category. When we look at the total anxiety, around 32.8% had anxiety, and 14.8% had depression, and 24% had high stress, and 59% had medium stress, and 17% had low stress, low perceived stress. When we compare the socio-demographic with details, sociographic characteristics with anxiety and depression, we couldn't find any significant association. And also, in regards to the clinical variables, having past history of psychiatric illness, family history, history of any medical comorbidity, and the severity of COVID-19 did not have any significant association with anxiety and depression. However, the duration of hospital stay, that is more than 1 to 2 weeks and 2 weeks, had a significant association with the levels of anxiety, and also poor social support, that is people who didn't have any who perceived that they didn't have any social support, had a significant association with both anxiety and depression. And when we correlated the perceived stress with anxiety and depression, it was seen that there was a positive correlation between the PSS scores and the HADS anxiety as well as the depression scores, which was statistically significant. Coming to the discussion, 83% of the subjects had medium to high perceived stress, and the magnitude of anxiety, that is 32.8%, and depression, the 14.8%, was similar to other studies. However, few studies have reported higher magnitude of depression. The longer duration of stay and lack of social support had a strong, significant association with levels of anxiety. However, only lack of social support was significantly related to depression. We could not find any association with other factors like age, socioeconomic status, education, or family history of psychiatric illness as seen in some other studies. Coming to the limitations of the study, being a cross-sectional single-centered study, it cannot be generalized, and longitudinal studies are needed for follow-up and to see the course of symptoms at the various points in time, and also having a lower study sample also is one of the limitations. And taking only mild and moderate cases of COVID-19, which was selected, that is one of the limitations. And using the screening instruments was another limitations. Probably objective rating scales could have been more better. Coming to the conclusion, there is considerably high prevalence of anxiety and depressions in patients hospitalized with COVID-19. In addition, most of them experience higher levels of perceived stress, and there was a high correlation between depression and anxiety with perceived stress. Hence, emphasis on providing psychological assessment, management, and counseling services will be beneficial and thus may be able to lessen the psychological burden of the COVID-19 infected patients. These are my references. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rakesh. You're slightly kind of like beyond the time which was
Yes, sir.
allotted. I
Sorry.
think that would be, you need to really keep that in mind, especially if you are really presenting for any award. This is a free
Sure, sir,
paper,
sure, sir.
that's fine. I just want to I just want to ask, like, after how many days that like you have seen these patients, they are admitted, no?
Yes, sir.
After how many days of COVID infection that like you interviewed these people?
Sir, usually like I've divided the duration of hospital stay into like less than 1 week, more than 1 week, and more than 2 weeks. So whenever I've gone cross-sectionally, depending on whatever number of days I've selected, sir.
Okay, so you took all the precautions for yourself when you.
Yeah. I was posted in the COVID ward, and that's when I
Okay,
had.
okay. I mean, it's a very clinically relevant study. Any informations on this post-COVID issues, especially from a psychological point of view, would be really beneficial. All the best. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Dr. Sheena Agarwal. Dr. Sheena.
Sina ma'am,
Sheena.
your microphone is mute. Please unmute yourself, ma'am. Sina ma'am. Check. Sina ma'am.
Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, you can share your screen, ma'am.
Yeah.
Dr. Sheena, are you there?
Yes, yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm here.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
hope I'm audible. I've just shared my screen.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Should I start, sir?
Yes.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. I shall be presenting my paper, Episodic Trichotillomania, Pica, and Obsessive Compulsive Symptoms and Recurrent Depressive Disorder, a case report. So, trichotillomania is the recurrent pulling out of one's hair and attempts to stop the same. Usually begins in early adolescence and is known to run a chronic course, affecting about 2% of the population. And it may be seen comorbid with anxiety disorders, mood disorders, obsessive compulsive disorders, body dysmorphic, or eating disorders. Whereas pica, the repetitive eating of non-nutritive, non-food substances, is usually associated with iron deficiency anemia, pregnancy, intellectual disability, schizophrenia, autism. There have been rare reports of comorbid trichotillomania and pica with chronic course in children. However, we couldn't come across any in adult males. So the aim is to report a case of adult onset episodic trichotillomania, pica, and obsessions in a patient with recurrent depression. So, patient is a 41-year-old single gentleman from a rural background who had onset of episodic illness at 30 years of age. The first episode fulfilled criteria for moderate depression without somatic syndrome, along with which he had some sexual thoughts that were repetitive, intrusive, and distressing, and the urge to eat mud, vibhuti, that was repetitive, in response to some abdominal pain-like sensation. He was treated with venlafaxine 150 mg and olanzapine 2.5 mg as an augmentation agent and remitted completely over the next 2 months. However, he was then lost to follow-up until about 2 years later when he presented with another episode that was diagnosed to be severe depression with psychotic symptoms, intracorporeal hallucinations, repetitive sexual thoughts distressing in nature. In this episode, he also started reporting urges to pluck his mustache and nose hair in response to an uncomfortable pain-like sensation in his abdomen. He would try to resist the urge but was rarely able to do so, with multiple prominent bald patches on his mustache. He also consumed the hair that he had pulled in an effort to quell the sensation, with often only temporary relief. He was treated with mirtazapine 45 mg, olanzapine 20 mg, and also required a course of 6 ECTs in this episode. Following which he had good recovery and a remission in mood, obsessive compulsive, pica, and trichotillomania symptoms, but was then further lost to follow-up for about 5 years. He then presented with a third episode, which fulfilled criteria for severe depression with psychotic symptoms, had intracorporeal hallucinations, reported of the urge to pluck and consume his mustache and nose hair, along with the urge to consume vibhuti and mud, and distressing sexual thoughts. Examination revealed pallor and platynychia, whereas lab values were suggestive of iron deficiency anemia, yielded a hemoglobin of 9.6. The Psychiatric Institute of Trichotillomania scale was administered with a score of 35. The Hamilton Rating Scale for depression score was 70, and Hamilton Rating Scale for anxiety was 12. He was continued on mirtazapine 45 mg, olanzapine 10 mg, and iron supplementation was started in view of the anemia. So, coming to some of the unique features in our patient. It's known that trichotillomania usually has onset in childhood or adolescence. However, our patient had adult onset of symptoms. So, trichotillomania, much like OCD, tends to run a chronic course, although waxing and waning may be seen. However, our patient showed an episodic course. Scalp and pubic hair are the most common sites of trichotillomania. However, our patient exclusively plucked hair from mustache and nose. He had symptoms of pica, trichotillomania, and sexual obsessions only during the episodes of depression, with good interepisodic recovery. There has been established efficacy of SSRIs in trichotillomania and pica. Some case reports talk about the same. However, our patient responded to SNRI. And he also needed olanzapine and a course of ECT in the second episode. So thus, this is a rare report of recurrent depression with the comorbid episodic pattern of a cluster of obsessive compulsive and related spectrum symptoms. So we know that trichotillomania is grouped under the obsessive compulsive and related disorders in DSM-5 and the upcoming ICD-11, where it has been shifted from the earlier habit and impulse control disorder group under ICD-10. This shows a shift in our understanding of this disorder. Whereas pica, it comes under the eating disorder in both these classificatory systems, that is ICD-11 and DSM-5. So there is said to be both trichotillomania and pica have been linked with obsessive compulsive disorder, as there is considerable phenomenological and neurobiological overlap with OCD. Phenomenologically speaking, all three of these disorders have compelling thoughts and behaviors which are attempted to be resisted. Thus, these three disorders may share a common pathophysiology, if not an etiology, as they may even respond to similar treatments such as SSRIs. Thank you.
Yeah, that was an interesting case. Interesting more in the sense that like it clearly presents in an episodic manner. So, do you also consider an independent mood disorder? Is it a recurrent depressive disorder?
Yes, sir. So all these symptoms only occurred in the context of mood. Always it was the mood symptoms that would start first, that were actually even more debilitating than the rest of these symptoms. So the recurrent depressive disorder was the primary diagnosis, and the other were the comorbid diagnoses that he had.
One interesting another doubt like I have is that like does he resist? Does he try to resist plucking his hair, or he does without any resistance?
So initially he would try to resist it, but he also felt a temporary relief after that. So he was rarely able to do so, but he felt the need to resist.
On top of pharmacotherapy, I think some amount of behavioral principles, especially in exposure and response prevention, or some amount of CBT would benefit looks like that, like he's having a recurrent episodes. So at least in future episodes, whether he would be able to control that. Thank you.
Yes, sir. That was actually planned.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Thank you. All the best.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Dr. Syed Nizaruddin.
Yes, sir.
Uh,
Is my screen available?
yes, sir. Yes, sir. You can
screen
start
is
your video
visible?
also.
Okay. Good
Make it,
afternoon,
make
everyone.
it side so, sir.
Yes,
Make
Dr.
it side so.
Syed, if you are ready, you can start.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. This is my study, dissociative experiences and its relation with insight in patients with schizophrenia. So, dissociation is a disconnection between the person's memory, feelings, behavior, and perceptions and sense of self. This is the definition given by DSM-5. It is an experience as a spectrum found across all individuals, normal individuals, as well as patients with psychiatric disorders such as schizophrenia. Now, psychotic illnesses like schizophrenia are characterized by lack of insight. Now, the relationship between dissociative symptoms and insight in patients with schizophrenia has not been much explored. So, this study attempts to address that. Previous studies, few attempts have been made all across the world, such as by Ania Justo in 2018, examined 120 patients with schizophrenia and found higher levels of dissociation in schizophrenia with higher levels of symptomatology and higher level of consciousness. And other systemic reviews have found greater dissociative experiences in schizophrenia with prevalence being around 6.9%. By Luke R. et al., 48 patients found greater dissociative experiences, which are greater in intensity and duration, and they gradually decreased on becoming chronic. By Gosheri and Sherry et al., they found that there was a significant association between positive symptoms in schizophrenia with dissociative symptoms. And another systemic review found that dissociative symptoms with a DAS score of average 19.66. So, however, there were no Indian studies assessing that, which our study aims to address. Now, the aim of the study will be looking at relationship between dissociative symptoms with the level of insight. The objectives would be to study the types of dissociative symptoms in patients with schizophrenia, their association with severity and level of insight. So, this study was conducted in inpatients of Institute of Mental Health, Hyderabad. The duration of the study was 3 months. The subjects were those with diagnosed schizophrenia according to ICD-10 criteria. The inclusion criteria with age those of more than 18 years, both male and female are included, and those consenting for the study by taking up of study. Excluded were those with other psychiatric disorders and uncontrolled medical conditions and intellectual disability. So the studies tools used were DES, which is Dissociative Experiences Scale. It is a 28-item self-report questionnaire with higher the score indicating higher level of dissociative experiences in their lifetime. And to assess level of insight, Birchwich Insight Scale was used. It is an 8-item self-report questionnaire with score ranging from 0 to 12, with higher score indicating a better insight. And for severity, PANASS, most commonly used scale for severity of illness, was used. It gives a score of positive score and negative score, composite score, which is difference between positive and negative, general psychopathology score, and total score. Now, the results and discussion. This is the socio-demographic table details of our patients with predominant male, education with mostly graduate, occupation were unskilled, and mostly from rural background, married, and lower socioeconomic class. The average score, DES score, which we got in our sample was 20.2. That is 20% of 20% experiences in the dissociative experiences in the patient, which is similar to the systematic review by Selwyn et al., which was 19.66. The average DAS score was higher in the female population compared to the male population, and younger population, younger patients had higher dissociative scores. Now, there is evidence from the previous study that schizophrenia patients had higher dissociative experiences, but this was to a lesser degree than compared to other diagnoses such as borderline personality disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, and dissociative identity disorder. In our study, the most common dissociative experience by the patient was that some people find that when they are alone, they talk aloud to themselves. The average score for this question was around 37.5%. And the next common experience that patient described was they sometimes find that they are listening to someone talk and they realize that they did not hear part of all of what was said. So this average score for the sample was 36.25. And the least common dissociative experience that was described was some people having experience of looking in the mirror and not recognizing themselves. The DES had 28 questions describing different dissociative experiences, and the average scores in decreasing order has been described in this table. Now, the mean PANSS score which we got in our sample was 23, and this indicates that our sample was mild to moderate severity of psychotic symptoms. Now, association of the dissociative symptoms with illness severity, we found that the dissociative symptoms were significantly associated with the general symptomatology score of the PANSS. But we could not find any significant association with positive symptoms of PANSS with dissociative experiences, which was found in the previous studies. And even with illness severity and level of insight, our sample did not find any significant association between severity of illness and level of insight, which was found in the previous studies. Now, this difference could be due to the influence of the psychiatric medication, which was not accounted for in the study. All our patients were inpatients which were put on treatment. Now, the association between dissociative experiences and insight, our study showed that there is a inverse relationship between dissociative symptoms and level of insight with p-value of 0.08, which means that patients which lack insight had a higher dissociative experiences. The strength of the study is that there were no Indian studies, and limitations of the study would be the smaller sample size and the effects of the drugs which are not taken into account, and the cross-sectional study design, which is assessing dynamic symptomatology, which the dissociative symptoms might improve with time, and even the level of insight. Implications of this study would be that identifying dissociative symptoms in patients with schizophrenia is essential, not to mislabel them as psychotic symptoms and changing medication or something, because dissociative symptoms respond better to psychotherapeutic approaches. That concludes my study.
Thank you, Dr. Syed. I think that's quite interesting. Looking at dissociative symptoms in schizophrenia, even though it's very rare, but we do come across these symptoms, and then as you rightly pointed out, it has a lot of implications from the treatment point of view, because
Yes.
that may not really respond to pharmacotherapy. So some amount of psychological intervention needs to be done. Okay, see, you
Yes.
have mentioned about dissociative symptoms. From your recollection, can you say that like any of these people had a syndromal diagnosis of dissociative disorder as per ICD-10 or something?
No, sir, because the level of the dissociation was not to a very significant and severely impairing what do you say, level. Most of the patients had problems with their psychopathology rather than these dissociative symptoms.
Because I'm a bit concerned, like some of the questions, as you mentioned that like, okay, I don't really hear what others are saying. Those are all kind of like, okay, even for a normal individual, like those kind of questions we may answer yes. and especially if you are
Yes.
asking schizophrenic individuals, and then like okay, you come across these kind of questions. So that's my only concern. But I think overall,
This was the subjective reporting, sir. DES
Yes.
scale is the patient's own subjective experience, whereas for PANSS, it is both the subjective experiences and reports from the family members and all that. Because a patient sometimes might not be aware that he's hearing voices, so that that not awareness is an differentiating point between uh, psychopathology and the dissociative experience.
that 17 patients that like you took, how did you select them?
These were the inpatients from our wards.
Yeah, how? See, there would be some 50, 60 patients would have got admitted, no, during that time. So how you chose this 16 out of that group? Is there any
Those-
particular sampling method that like you followed?
No, sir.
You mean to say it's all convenient
Those-
sampling,
Yeah, convenient sampling.
or you come across these people already having some dissociative symptoms, so you went and
No, sir.
no.
Random
Okay.
convenience
Yeah,
sampling.
yeah. So see, these kind of studies, like okay, if you can mention about how you exactly select those samples, so that would really give us a better idea. Otherwise, you can always choose your own as per your wish. So that's not really accepted in kind of like research. So kind of like okay, every fifth patient or every subsequent patients, or the patients who are admitted on Mondays, Wednesdays, something like that. Okay. Anyway, thank you. Thank you for your presentation. All the best.
Thank you, sir.
So we have one. You are Dr. Gayatri. Yeah, please.
Good afternoon to one and all. This is Dr. Gayatri, second year postgraduate from Institute of Mental Health. I'm here to present my study about characteristics of patients experiencing extrapyramidal symptoms related to second generation antipsychotic use, retrospective cohort study. As we all know, antipsychotics have been prescribed for multitude of psychiatric illnesses, and they are broadly classified into first generation and second generation antipsychotics. As of now, we predominantly use second generation antipsychotics owing to their lesser side effects. Nevertheless, they do produce a considerable amount of extrapyramidal side effects that can range from simple tremors to very distressing symptoms like that of acute dystonias and akathisias. So there are certain factors attributing to the development of extrapyramidal side effects, like the particular type of second generation agent, high doses, history of extrapyramidal symptoms. And why we need to study the propensity of extrapyramidal symptoms with relation to second generation antipsychotics is that it can lead to patient having discontinuation from the pharmacotherapy, and it can also affect their socio-occupational status. So the aim of the study is to understand the risk factors like the type of second generation antipsychotic use, age, gender, BMI, dose initiation and escalation, contributing to the development of extrapyramidal side effects. Materials and methods. Study center was Institute of Mental Health, Kilpak. Study method, retrospective cohort study. Study duration 2 months from July to September 2021. Sample size was about 60. Inclusion criteria, age group from 18 to 65 years were taken. Patients with diagnosis of schizophrenia, BPAD, intellectual disability, mental disorders due to substance use, and major depressive illness according to ICD-10. Exclusion criteria being organic mental illness, patients with movement disorders, patients receiving lithium. Sample size calculation. Sample size was estimated using prevalence from the parent study and was estimated to be 58. We have taken about 60 samples. And samples were collected from Medical Records Department, Institute of Mental Health, Deer Park, from where case sheets with documented evidence of EPS between July 2021 to September 2021 were taken. This is the distribution of variables among the study participants, where we have taken age, gender, diagnosis, name of the antipsychotic drug used, dosage, chlorpromazine equivalent, dose initiation escalation, time change, adverse effects, and BMI was taken. This chart depicts the association between gender and adverse effects, and it is found that females generally have more propensity for developing tremors, while male were more commonly found to have severe side effects like akathisia, hypersalivation, dystonias, and bradykinesia. This depicts the association between the diagnosis and adverse effect. There was no correlation between diagnosis and adverse effects. And this chart depicts association between dose initiation and escalation and adverse effects. And this also did not show any particular correlation between association of dose initiation and escalation and adverse effects. Coming to the discussion, there were about 18.3 under 15 to 25 years, followed by 21% to in between the age group of 26 to 35, and 31.7 in the 36 to 45 years, and 18.3% between 46 to 55 years, and 10% between 56 to 65 years. There is a male preponderance among the study participants. There are about 5% alcohol dependence, 21.7 bipolar affective, 3.3 cannabis use disorder, 18.3 intellectual disability, and 1.7 major depressive disorder, and 50% schizophrenia. Around 48.3 persons were using risperidone, 5% quetiapine, 40% olanzapine, and 6.7 clozapine. Around 73.3 were having dose escalation and 26.7 dose initiation. There were, in our study, 5% had akathisia, 16.7 had bradykinesia, 13.3 had dystonia, and 25% had hypersalivation, and 40% had tremors. There was a significant association between gender and adverse effects. Tremors were significantly high among females. Hypersalivation, dystonia, bradykinesia were significantly more among males. There was no significant association between diagnosis and adverse effect, no significant correlation between dose initiation and escalation. Coming to the limitations, the main limitation in this study is the low sample size and short duration, and polypharmacy could be a confounding factor. Coming to the future scope, we can also compare between the first generation and second generation, and we can also follow up the dropouts so that we can know why, because of what extrapyramidal side effects they have stopped the medication. This is the references. Thank you.
Do you have any correlation between any particular drug and extrapyramidal symptoms?
In the study, people receiving olanzapine had more of tremors and side effects compared to risperidone.
Did that come in your slide?
No, sir.
No. Okay. So, because what is your idea? What do you want to prove?
Whether is there any particular drug which produces more side effect, and is there any gender related side effects?
Did you see these patients, or it was only the records?
It was only the records.
So basically, like you went through the records and then like okay, collected those informations. So anyway, any kind of studies, and is it part of your thesis?
No, sir.
Okay. So any kind of study which can, we know that like extrapyramidal symptoms do happen with second generation antipsychotics. If these kind of studies which can specify the drug, especially whether is there any dose related connection is there. We know that like higher doses of risperidone is much more than the usual doses of risperidone and other drugs also. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Now it's time to honor our chairperson. I welcome Dr. Rajaram, Director of Atma Hospital, to honor our Dr. L. Anand. Thank